Ethan's key twisted in the front door lock, but it didn't click open immediately. He frowned, trying again, and this time the deadbolt turned. Quietly, he stepped inside the dimly lit house, setting his briefcase down by the entry table. It wasn't late, just past 8 p.m., but the house was unusually quiet. The smell of candles lingered faintly in the air. That was odd. His wife, Laura, always kept the place spotless, but she wasn't the type to light candles unless they had company. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Laura," he called out. No response. He set his coat over the chair, eyes narrowing as he stepped toward the stairs. That was when he heard it, the creak of floorboards above him. The bedroom. Ethan's pulse quickened. His mind raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. Maybe she was folding laundry, or maybe one of her friends had stopped by unannounced. That would explain the glasses. But deep down, he knew. Halfway up the stairs, Ethan caught sight of Laura's heels lying at the bottom of the hallway, her black dress crumpled nearby. She never left her clothes like that. Another creak. Ethan's heart pounded now. Standing at the bedroom door, he didn't bother to knock. He twisted the handle and shoved it open. The room smelled of perfume and sweat. Laura sat on the edge of the bed, hastily pulling her hair into a loose bun, still flushed. The sheets were rumpled behind her. She looked up at Ethan, freezing mid-motion. "Oh," she said, eyes flicking toward the bathroom door that was slightly ajar. Water dripped faintly from the faucet inside. Ethan didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, letting the silence stretch. "Working late?" Laura asked casually, but her voice was too light, too forced. She pulled her robe around her, tying the knot with deliberate slowness. Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed the wine glass from the nightstand. He turned it in his hand, watching the way the light caught the smudges. "This isn't your color," he murmured, tracing the rim where faint lipstick prints lingered. Laura's lips parted, but no sound came out. That was when the bathroom door opened, and a tall, disheveled man stepped out, towel wrapped around his waist. Ethan didn't recognize him. The stranger's eyes widened, but he didn't move, like a deer caught in headlights. Ethan set the glass down with precision, his movements slow and deliberate. "Who the fuck are you?" he asked calmly, locking eyes with the man. Before either Laura or the stranger could answer, Ethan took 2 steps closer, leaning against the dresser, as if he had all the time in the world. The stranger hesitated, his hand twitching toward the towel at his waist, as if Ethan cared whether he was clothed or not. "I asked you a question," Ethan repeated, his voice quieter but sharper. Laura jumped to her feet, rushing between them, her palms pressed against Ethan's chest to create space. "Ethan, stop. Let's just—" He grabbed her wrist mid-sentence, not roughly, but firmly enough to silence her. His eyes didn't leave the man's face. "You're standing in my house," Ethan said, voice low. "Next to my wife. You don't get to just fucking stand there." The man swallowed hard, his atoms apple-bobbing like he was about to speak. But before he could, Laura yanked her wrist away and stepped in front of him. "Ethan, please." "It's not what it looks like." Ethan arched an eyebrow, gesturing to the unmade bed, the half-empty wine glass, and the man barely holding onto his towel. "Really? Because it looks exactly like what I think it is." Laura's hands trembled as she reached for his arm. "It is not serious. He's no one, Ethan. It didn't mean anything." The stranger finally spoke up, shifting awkwardly. "Look, man, I didn't know she was married." "She never said." Ethan's head snapped toward him, and for the first time his calm cracked. "Shut the fuck up." The man froze. Laura grabbed Ethan's hand, her eyes wide with desperation. "Listen to me." Ethan jerked his hand away. "You're seriously going to stand there and insult me like that?" he said, pointing to the bed. "I'm not an idiot, Laura." The weight of her betrayal hit him in waves, suffocating and relentless. 7 years of marriage, and this is where they ended up? A towel-wrapped stranger in his house, pretending to be invisible. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head as he stepped back. "You know," he said softly, looking at Laura, "I trusted you. Every late night, every time you said you were working late, I believed you. Hell, I defended you when people joked about it." Laura's face crumpled. "Ethan, He held up his hand. Don't even try." He turned toward the stranger, sizing him up. He wasn't particularly remarkable, tall, lean, with the kind of forgettable face that made Ethan's blood boil. This was the guy she risked everything for? "You got 10 seconds to get out of my house," Ethan said. The man didn't wait. He grabbed his pants off the floor, still buttoning them as he half-stumbled down the stairs. Ethan followed, watching as the front door slammed behind him. Laura trailed behind, hovering nervously by the staircase. "Ethan, please. We can fix this." He slowly turned, meeting her eyes. For a brief moment, he saw the woman he married, the one he loved, trusted, and built a life with. But the image shattered like glass, replaced by the one standing barefoot in her robe, spinning lies to cover the truth. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Fix it," he repeated. "Laura, you can't even tell me the truth." "How long?" She hesitated. "A couple of months." He clenched his jaw, biting back the storm of emotions rising inside him. "Months? Why?" Laura's gaze dropped to the floor, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I felt like you were distant. I thought maybe. I didn't think it would hurt anyone." Ethan's laugh was cold, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Didn't think it would hurt anyone?" His heart pounded, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the stair railing. "Laura," he said, voice dropping into something darker, "I've worked my ass off for this life. For you. And you throw it away for what? Some random fling?" "I'm sorry, Ethan," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "It was a mistake. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes." Ethan let the silence stretch, watching her shift nervously under his stare. "Yeah," he said, stepping away. "You will." As Ethan walked to the kitchen, Laura called after him, her voice cracking. "Where are you going?" He paused at the doorway, but didn't look back. "To think," he said flatly, grabbing his keys. "I suggest you do the same." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Laura standing alone in the house that suddenly felt too big, too empty. What do you think Ethan should do next? Should he forgive her or start planning his revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Ethan sat in his car in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The glow from the house's windows made him feel sick. It was too warm, too familiar, like nothing had happened. But something had, and there was no undoing it. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Laura. He ignored it. Instead, his eyes drifted to the man's car, still parked a block down the street. A black BMW. Flashy. Too perfect. Ethan felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to walk over and put his fist through the windshield. But he wouldn't. Not yet. He needed a plan. The rage simmered beneath his skin, but Ethan forced it down. He wasn't going to be the guy who lost control and did something stupid. Not tonight. Instead, he scrolled through his phone, pulling up the security app for the house. 2 weeks ago, he watched the footage as Laura arrived home late. Too late for a woman who claimed she'd been at work dinners. Ethan fast-forwarded through the clips, stopping when the BMW showed up in his driveway for the first time. The guy had been here before. 3 nights. Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. He wasn't sure why that detail made it worse, but it did. His phone buzzed again. This time a text. Laura, Ethan, please come back inside. We need to talk. He stared at the message for a long moment, the words blurring. Finally, he typed back. Me. I'll come inside when you're ready to tell me everything. Her response was instant. Laura, I told you it didn't mean anything. Ethan smiled, but there was no humor in it. Me. You better try harder than that. He let the phone drop back into the cup holder, the screen dimming. The front door opened, and Laura stepped outside in her robe, arms crossed against the cold. She glanced toward his car, but didn't come closer. Even from a distance, Ethan could see her pacing. For a brief moment, he thought about the early days. Back when Laura would pull him back inside after arguments, her apologies soft and genuine. She had been different then, less guarded. But that was years ago. Now, Ethan wasn't sure if the woman standing in front of their house was even capable of telling the truth. His eyes drifted to the BMW again. If it didn't mean anything, why did it happen 3 times? Ethan could almost hear her excuse already. It was a mistake. I was lonely, but that wasn't good enough. He didn't just want an apology. He wanted to make her regret every lie she'd told. Ethan stayed in the car just long enough to watch Laura give up and head back inside. The door closed softly behind her, but he knew she was still pacing, waiting for him to come in and swallow whatever half-baked excuse she had lined up. Not tonight. The BMW was still parked at the curb. Ethan stepped out of his car, locking it with a quiet beep. His gaze flicked to the house, watching for any sign that Laura was peeking through the blinds. Nothing. He strolled casually down the street, hands in his pockets, stopping next to the sleek black car. He crouched beside the rear tire and pressed his key into the rubber until he heard the soft hiss of air escaping. Not enough to make it obvious right away, but by the time that asshole tried to drive home, the tire would be flatter than his excuse for slipping out the back door. Ethan stood, stepping back onto the sidewalk as if nothing had happened. When he returned to his car, he sat there, calm, breathing in the cold night air. The act of slicing that tire had barely scratched the surface of his anger, but it was enough to hold him over for now. His phone buzzed again. "Laura, Ethan, please let's just talk. Can we fix this? Fix this?" He almost laughed. "Me? I'll come inside when he's gone." There was no response this time, but a few minutes later, the porch light flickered off. Ethan waited. A shadow passed behind the curtains. Then, after another long pause, the BMW's headlights flared to life. The car pulled slowly down the street, the driver none the wiser about the air steadily leaking from his tire. Ethan watched it disappear around the corner. Only then did he get out and walk back toward the house. When he stepped inside, Laura was sitting at the dining room table, arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "Happy?" Ethan kicked off his shoes and tossed his keys onto the counter. "Not even close." She blinked rapidly, as if expecting him to scream or flip the table. Instead, Ethan poured himself a drink from the whiskey decanter on the sideboard. "I asked you how long this has been going on," he said calmly, swirling the amber liquid in the glass. "You told me a couple of months. You want to try that answer again?" Laura shifted in her seat. "I don't know. 3 times, Ethan interrupted, watching her closely. "That's how many times I've seen his car on the security cameras." Her eyes widened slightly. "Ethan, I wasn't watching," he said. "I trusted you. But trust doesn't stop cameras from recording." Laura's lips trembled, but no words came out. Ethan took a slow sip, letting the silence drag. "You weren't going to stop, were you?" he asked. "If I hadn't caught you." She looked down at the table, her knuckles white against the wood. "No," she admitted softly. Ethan's stomach twisted at the quiet honesty in her voice. At least she wasn't lying now. "Why him?" he asked. "Seriously, Laura. Of all the guys, why him?" Her eyes flicked toward the empty glass of wine on the table. "He made me feel wanted, like I wasn't invisible." Ethan set his glass down with a sharp clink. "Invisible? Are you kidding me?" She flinched but didn't look away. "I worked late to build this life for us, Laura. For you. And the second you felt lonely, you jumped into bed with someone else?" Laura's breath hitched. "I didn't plan it, Ethan. It just happened." His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, leaning over the table, staring directly into her tear-filled eyes. "You're damn right it happened. And now you're going to live with it." Laura swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" Ethan didn't answer. Not yet, but he already knew exactly what it meant. Would you forgive Laura if you were in Ethan's shoes? Or would you start planning something bigger? Let me know in the comments. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Laura tried to slide into bed beside him hours later, but he didn't move, didn't flinch, just lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a cinder block on his chest. Around 2 a.m., she gave up and retreated to the guest room. The soft click of the door echoed louder than it should have. Good. By the time the sun crept through the blinds, Ethan had made up his mind. He wasn't going to scream. He wasn't going to throw things. And he sure as hell wasn't going to let Laura off easy. She wanted to feel wanted? Fine. He'd make sure she regretted ever craving someone else's attention. As Ethan sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, a familiar name caught his eye. Mark Tremblay. Mark was a divorce attorney. Not the cheap kind. The get-everything-she's-coming kind. Ethan hovered over the contact, but didn't press call. Not yet. Instead, he grabbed his laptop, opened their joint bank account, and started combing through the last 6 months of transactions. Laura's spending habits told a story of their own. 2 fancy hotel charges stood out. Both on weekends Ethan remembered being out of town for work. She wasn't even careful. As he scrolled further, He found receipts for lingerie he hadn't seen and dinners at restaurants he hadn't been invited to. It wasn't just an affair. It was a lifestyle. Ethan closed the laptop, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The anger was still there, but now it felt colder, calculated. By the time Laura finally came downstairs, barefoot and pale, Ethan was already dressed for the day. "Morning," she said softly, as if testing the waters. He barely looked up. "Morning." She hesitated by the coffee maker. "I thought maybe we could talk." "I can't. Busy day." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ethan, please." He glanced at his watch. "I'll be home late." That wasn't a lie, but she didn't need to know where he was really going. Ethan's first stop wasn't the office. It was Bradford Motors, the BMW dealership downtown. "Good morning, sir. What can I help you with today?" the salesman asked, grinning far too wide for Ethan's liking. "I need to know who bought a black 7 Series in the last 6 months," Ethan said, cutting straight to the point. "And I need you to pull the registration." The salesman's smile faltered. "I'm not sure I can do that." Ethan slid a $200 bill across the desk. "You sure?" The guy stared at the money for a long moment before plucking it off the table and tucking it into his pocket. "Give me a second." 5 minutes later, Ethan had a name, Daniel O'Connor. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As Ethan left the dealership, he found himself smiling for the first time in days. Later that night, Ethan came home, just as he said he would. Laura was in the kitchen, stirring something in a pot, trying too hard to pretend things were normal. "How was work?" she asked, voice forced and cheery. Ethan kissed her on the cheek. "Fine." And for the first time since discovering the affair, he felt completely in control. Because now, he wasn't just Ethan Gilbert, the betrayed husband. He was Ethan Gilbert, the man who knew exactly how to destroy everything Laura thought she could keep hidden. And he wasn't going to stop until he was done. Ethan sat in his car outside O'Connor Real Estate, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. The sleek glass building glared at him under the late afternoon sun, but Ethan barely noticed. His focus was locked on the black BMW parked 3 spots down. Daniel O'Connor. He hadn't planned to confront him. Not directly. But the moment Ethan spotted the car, something inside him shifted. Laura's words from the night before echoed in his mind. It didn't mean anything. But affairs didn't last for months if they didn't mean anything. Ethan got out, shutting the car doors softly behind him. Inside the office, a young receptionist smiled up at him. "Welcome to O'Connor Real Estate. Do you have an appointment?" "Sort of," Ethan said, sliding his hands into his pockets. "I'm looking for Daniel." The receptionist tilted her head slightly. "Mr. O'Connor's with a client." "That's fine," Ethan said with a calm smile. "I'll wait." The receptionist nodded, returning to her work. Ethan leaned against the wall, crossing his arms as he glanced around the pristine office. He didn't have to wait long. 15 minutes later, Daniel emerged from his office, shaking hands with the couple before walking them to the front. His smile was the kind that came naturally to men who got everything they wanted. Polished, charming, arrogant. Ethan hated him instantly. Daniel spotted him as the couple left. "Hey there, can I help you with something?" Ethan stepped forward, offering his hand. "Yeah, I think we need to talk." Daniel hesitated for half a second, but shook Ethan's hand anyway. "Daniel O'Connor." "I know," Ethan said smoothly. "Ethan Gilbert." Daniel's grip loosened as realization set in. Ethan could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. "Laura's husband," Ethan added. Daniel released his hand and cleared his throat, forcing a polite smile. "Listen, I don't think... You think I'm here to punch you in the face?" Ethan asked casually. "Don't worry, I'm not." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know she was married at first." Ethan chuckled, cutting him off. "That's what they all say. But we both know that's bullshit." Daniel glanced nervously at the receptionist. "Look, man." Ethan took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not here for excuses. I just thought I'd introduce myself. Since you've been fucking my wife for the last 3 months, I figured we should get to know each other." Daniel's face paled. Ethan clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "Relax. Like I said, no violence." Daniel swallowed hard. "Then why are you here?" Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Because I want you to know, I'm not going anywhere. And neither is Laura." Daniel blinked. "Wait, what?" "You heard me," Ethan said. She's staying with me. And every time you think about calling her, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember my face. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Is this some kind of game to you? Ethan's voice dropped lower. No, Daniel. This isn't a game. This is my wife. Silence stretched between them. Ethan let it hang before finally stepping back. Take care, Ethan said lightly, heading for the door. As he left, he caught Daniel watching him through the glass, standing rigid and pale. Ethan smiled. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Would you have confronted Daniel like Ethan did, or taken a different approach? Let me know in the comments below. Here's part 7 of the story. Laura was sitting on the couch when Ethan walked through the door. She looked up from her phone, her face tense, eyes flicking to his like she was bracing for a storm. Where were you? She asked, tucking her hair behind her ear. Ethan shrugged, dropping his keys onto the counter. Ran some errands. She narrowed her eyes. Errands until 8 o'clock? I didn't realize I had a curfew. Laura flinched at his tone, but quickly masked it with indifference. I just thought maybe we could talk. Ethan leaned against the kitchen island, crossing his arms. About what? She set her phone down on the coffee table. You've barely said 2 words to me since last night. I know you're angry, but ignoring me isn't going to fix anything. Oh, I'm not ignoring you, Laura. I'm just thinking. About what? He held her gaze, letting the silence linger. About how I'm going to handle this, he said finally. Her eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe, or guilt. But she quickly straightened, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her sweater. I told you I'd end it. I haven't talked to him since you found out. Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. Yeah, I know. Laura's brows knit together. What's that supposed to mean? Ethan walked to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a glass of bourbon. He swirled it lazily before taking a sip. It means you don't have to talk to him, Laura. I already did. The color drained from her face. You what? I stopped by his office. Ethan's voice was calm, measured. Just to introduce myself. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. She sank back into the couch, clutching the edge of the cushion. Ethan, why would you do that? I figured since he's been comfortable enough to screw my wife, the least I could do is shake his hand. Laura's face twisted with panic. Jesus, Ita, what did you say to him? Nothing violent, if that's what you're worried about. He took another sip, locking eyes with her. But I let him know exactly where I stand, and where you stand. Laura shot to her feet. You're making this worse. I told you I'd handle it. Oh, you handled it all right. Ethan set his glass down with a soft clink. By sneaking around for months, you had plenty of time to handle it. But you didn't. Her hands trembled at her sides. I didn't want to hurt you. Funny how I still ended up hurt. Laura pressed her fingers to her temples, exhaling shakily. Ethan, please. I know I messed up, but you going after him. This isn't about him, Laura. Ethan's voice cut through her rambling like a knife. This is about you. You're the one who let him in. You're the one who lied every night. So don't stand there and act like I'm the problem. Tears welled in her eyes, but Ethan felt nothing watching them fall. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. Ethan's stare hardened. You already did. Laura sucked in a breath, her body stiffening. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to something cold and sharp. You think this is over because I didn't throw him through a window? No, Laura. This is just the beginning. What does that mean? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan grabbed his coat from the chair and slipped it on. It means I'm not rushing to forgive you. I'm not forgetting this. You're going to feel every ounce of what you did, day by day. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand what it's like to be the one left in the dark. Laura's knees buckled, and she sank back onto the couch, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan walked to the door, pausing as his hand gripped the knob. Don't wait up, he said over his shoulder. The door clicked shut behind him. Do you think Ethan's playing it smart? Or should he walk away entirely? Let me know what you think in the comments. Ethan didn't drive far. He parked 2 blocks away, in front of an old diner, letting the hum of the engine fill the silence. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the hood of his car. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Laura. Again. He ignored it, staring out the windshield. For the first time since this all started, Ethan wasn't sure what his next move was supposed to be. He could feel the weight of it pressing down, The lies, the betrayal, the image of Laura sitting on their bed while another man slipped out the back door like a goddamn coward. Ethan's hand tightened around the steering wheel. Maybe he should have hit Daniel. Maybe he should have screamed until Laura packed her bags and left. But something about that felt easy. Too easy. Letting her walk away felt like letting her off the hook. He wasn't ready for that. Not yet. A knock on the driver's side window startled him. Ethan turned to see Mark Tremblay, his old friend and divorce attorney, standing outside with a knowing smile. Ethan rolled the window down. Jesus, Mark. You stalking me now? Mark shrugged. You've been parked here for 20 minutes. Figured something was up. Ethan laughed under his breath, shaking his head. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Mark glanced at the empty passenger seat. Laura. Ethan's silence was answer enough. Mark leaned against the car, folding his arms across his chest. So, you here to talk? Or am I wasting my time? Ethan hesitated for a long moment, staring at his reflection in the rear-view mirror. Finally, he pushed the door open. They sat at the far corner of the diner, the waitress barely acknowledging them as she dropped 2 cups of coffee onto the table. Mark stirred his with a spoon, watching Ethan carefully. So, tell me how bad it is. Ethan sighed, rubbing his hands down his face. 3 months. Maybe more. I caught her 2 nights ago. Some guy she met at work dinners. Mark's eyes narrowed. You sure you don't want me to draft the papers? Ethan didn't answer. Mark set his spoon down with a soft clink. Ethan, I know you. You're not the guy who sits around licking his wounds. If you're not ending it, what's the plan? Ethan stared into his coffee, watching the steam curl from the cup. I want her to feel it. Mark raised an eyebrow. Feel what? What it's like to live with doubt. To wonder if the person next to you is lying through their teeth. Mark smirked. So, revenge. I don't know if I'd call it that. I would. Mark leaned back in his chair. And I'll tell you right now, it's messy. You can make her suffer, sure. But that eats away at you too. You'll end up hating each other. Ethan sipped his coffee slowly, letting Mark's words hang in the air. Maybe, Ethan admitted. But she doesn't just get to walk away from this. Mark nodded, running his thumb along the rim of the cup. So what now? I'm not leaving, Ethan said plainly. I'm going to make her regret every second of it. Mark chuckled, shaking his head. Just don't burn the house down in the process. No promises. They sat in silence for a while after that, 2 old friends watching the world go by outside the diner windows. What do you think? Should Ethan follow through with his plan, or is Mark right about revenge making things worse? Ethan pulled into the driveway just after midnight. The house was dark, except for the faint glow coming from the upstairs bedroom window. She was still awake. Good. He took his time getting out of the car, making sure the creak of the front door was loud enough for her to hear. By the time he kicked off his shoes, Laura was standing at the top of the stairs, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was bracing for something. Where were you? Her voice was soft, but the tension was razor-sharp. Ethan let the question hang as he walked to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. When he finally looked at her, she was still frozen there, barefoot, wearing one of his t-shirts like old times, but the sight didn't stir the same warmth it used to. I was out, Ethan said flatly. That's not an answer. He leaned against the counter, swirling the water in his glass. It's all you're getting. Laura shifted uncomfortably, stepping down one stair, then another, until she was just a few feet away from him. You can't just disappear. Not after everything. Ethan arched an eyebrow. Disappear? Kind of like you did on those Wednesday nights? Her eyes dropped to the floor. I said I was sorry. Yeah, Ethan muttered. You did. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Laura took a breath and glanced up. What are we doing, Ethan? I can't take this. Living in this house with you just waiting for the next cold shoulder or passive-aggressive comment. Either we fix it or we don't. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then set his glass down with deliberate care. You're right, he said, stepping closer. Laura's breath hitched. I've been thinking, Ethan continued, voice soft but deadly. Maybe we should fix things. Her eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. You mean that? Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. Absolutely. Laura reached for his arm, but he stepped past her, heading toward the stairs. Starting tomorrow, he added without turning around. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. Tomorrow? Yeah, Ethan said, pausing at the top of the stairs. We'll do something nice. Dinner. Maybe open a bottle of that wine you like. Laura hesitated at the bottom, her hands gripping the railing. Ethan and I. Get some sleep, he interrupted, offering the faintest of smiles. I'll see you in the morning. She nodded hesitantly, but her eyes lingered on him longer than necessary, like she was searching for something beneath the surface. Ethan watched her disappear into the guest room before he stepped into their bedroom. He didn't lock the door, but he didn't sleep either, because tomorrow wasn't about fixing things. It was about starting the part of the plan Laura wasn't ready for. The next evening, Ethan set the table for two. He lit candles, poured her favorite wine, and even played the soft jazz Laura used to love during their date nights. She lingered in the doorway, watching him. You didn't have to do all this, she said softly. Ethan smiled, the picture of calm. I wanted to. Laura stepped closer, smoothing down the silk dress she hadn't worn in months. I'm glad, she said, her voice wavering. I missed this. I missed us. Ethan nodded, pulling out her chair. Let's enjoy the night. She sat, casting nervous glances at him between sips of wine. I know you probably don't believe me, Laura said eventually, but I do regret everything. I was selfish, Ethan, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me. He raised his glass. To moving forward. Laura smiled faintly, relief flooding her face as their glasses clinked. They ate in near silence after that, Laura easing into the quiet, Ethan letting her think everything was fine. But it wasn't, because as she reached for the wine bottle to refill her glass, Ethan's phone buzzed on the table. Laura froze. The screen lit up with a name she knew all too well. Daniel O'Connor. The blood drained from her face. Ethan, why is he calling you? Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms as the phone buzzed again, the sound loud and jarring in the otherwise perfect atmosphere. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I thought I told you, Ethan said, tilting his head slightly. I ran into Daniel yesterday. Had a nice little chat. Laura's lips parted in shock. What did you say to him? Ethan's smile was razor-sharp. Nothing incriminating, but enough to make him nervous. I told him I wasn't going anywhere, and neither are you. Laura set the wine down, her hand trembling. Ethan, please, you don't need to do this. Oh, Ido. His eyes locked on hers, calm but unyielding. See, I thought about leaving. I thought about packing my bags and letting you have the house, the car, and half my bank account. But I decided against it. Laura swallowed hard. Why? Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Because I'd rather stay. I want you to feel every inch of this, Laura. Every time you look at me, I want you to remember what you risked. Tears welled in her eyes. I can't live like this. You're punishing me for... Exactly. Ethan cut in, his voice cold. And I'm going to keep punishing you. Every day. You don't get to walk away from this and pretend like nothing happened. Laura's shoulders sagged as the weight of his words sank in. But, Ethan added, pouring himself another glass, if you do decide you can't live like this. He met her gaze. There's the door. Laura's eyes flickered to the front hallway, her breath shaky. But she didn't move. And Ethan knew she wouldn't. Not tonight. Not for a long time. As he raised his glass to his lips, Ethan savored the taste of victory. The game wasn't over. It was just getting started. Would you have handled things the same way Ethan did? Or would you have walked away from the marriage entirely? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for following this story to the end. Subscribe to our channel